There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Olivia from Auckland is back. It's been a long time, Olivia. Welcome back.
Thank you. My third time. I'm so excited.
Yes, good things come to those who wait. So I waited and I found a book that I was dying to talk to you about. And so here we are. It is a novel from New Zealand. It's called Loop Tracks by Sue Orr. Tell us about this book.
It's such a good book. I read it because, a friend recommended it to me because she was reading the long list for the New Zealand Book Awards, the Ockhams. And I think sometimes New Zealand fiction doesn't get as much publicity as it should. So it's a great task to read the long list so you can kind of get a sense of what's happening in our fiction over here. And it's a really Kiwi Aotearoa New Zealand book. So it's about so many things, but I guess it's about social issues. It starts with, it opens with a young girl who is in need of an abortion. Abortion in New Zealand has only just recently become legalized. It's always been in the Crimes Act, but it's always been available. But the book opens at a time when the only abortion clinic has closed down. And so part of the reason the book is called Loop Tracks is because women who needed abortions in the 70s during this sort of 18-month period when there was no clinic went on a round trip to Australia to have their termination and then come back. And so that's where the book starts.
And so that earlier part of the story is what, 1978?
Yeah, 77 to 78 from memory. It's a while since I read it, but yeah, that late 70s period. Yep.
And that's one timeline. What's the other timeline?
The other timeline is, really interesting for all of us around the world because it's set during the pandemic. So 2020, March. And what I found quite interesting is that Sue Orr started writing the book before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit. And she thought, well, I've got these established characters. I've got this story. I'm going through the pandemic, so my characters are going to go through it too. So it kind of creates this really interesting past, present, sort of parallel storylines that both of them have lots and lots of social kind of hot topic issues going on. So in the past storyline, there's the abortion storyline. And then in the present, you've got the pandemic and then lots of other things because we also, during the pandemic, had a general election.
Yes, it sounds like a hotbed of social political mayhem. Tell us about the main character.
The main character is called Charlie, and the story is told solely from her perspective. So she's the character at the beginning who needs this abortion. And it's not really a spoiler to say that she sort of grapples with it, but she's very young, very naive. And then we come to the present day storyline where she's now an older woman, she's living alone, and her grandson has come to live with her. And she's such an interesting character because she sort of gets a second chance at motherhood with her grandson. She's getting the second shot, and he's a really interesting and quirky guy. He's on the autism spectrum. He's leaving school, entering that early adulthood kind of phase where you're being opened up to the world, but he's finding it difficult to navigate, and she finds it difficult to parent him. He needs a lot of care, a lot of love, and she's had to protect him his whole life. And she's starting to realize that she has to let him go and explore the world on his own. Yeah, so there's lots of really interesting sort of family dynamics going on.
You've already alluded to the fact that 2019 or the later part of the storyline is a pretty interesting time in New Zealand. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, totally. It's a book that really brings together all sorts of different social issues just because of when it's set. So this general election was a really interesting one for New Zealand because in addition to voting for who we wanted to be our government, the public was asked to vote on 2 referenda. So one to legalise cannabis or decriminalise cannabis, that never passed. And the book doesn't deal with that one so much. What it really deals with is the other referenda, which was on whether or not to legalise euthanasia. And so that brings up all sorts of issues. And because it was happening during the pandemic, in the one sense, the whole country is talking about this, but we're also all locked up with our families, and you've got generations who probably have very, very different beliefs on these things, all locked up together. And again, I think the pandemic, maybe this resonates with you, but it created a time when people's views became really extreme. And so the book deals with that as well. So Charlie and her grandson have differing views on the referendums and what should happen. And then the third issue that comes up, which is really, really topical for Charlie, is that the government decided to pass legislation to take abortion out of the Crimes Act in New Zealand. And that just happened. It wasn't a referendum. But because there was lots of conversation about euthanasia and the Christian lobby was really, really active on that topic, abortion gets brought into the debate as well. And yeah, that becomes quite heated within the family.
This is the first COVID novel that is set in COVID that has gotten consistently glowing reviews, whereas anything else I've heard about has gotten mediocre reviews or a wide variety of positive and negative reviews. So
I think
most people say it's too soon to write a COVID novel. What do you have to say to naysayers?
Yeah. I've read other pandemic novels and thought they were okay, and thought some of them felt too soon. I would say that this novel works because it is just set during the pandemic. For me, it didn't really feel like it was about the pandemic. I think that it created a setting and kind of a situation for characters where they were like enclosed together. We had really, really strict isolation laws in New Zealand during the pandemic. So there was no real choices about what you could and couldn't do. Everyone was locked up at home. And so it creates this environment, as I said before, where people were forced to talk with their family members. Politics were, really hot topic at the time. And so that, the only people you have to talk to are your family members. And so I think for a pandemic novel, it's not really about the pandemic. It's about the family dynamics, and the pandemic is the backdrop to that. Yep. So it's about different perspectives, and it's about the way that generations differ on different things. And it's about the way that we really want our loved ones to believe the same things that we do, but we know that doesn't always happen, and actually it very rarely happens. And it's about how the family deals with that. It's smart and it's clever, and everything comes together in such a really satisfying way. It sounds like it deals with a lot, and I've read novels that try to do that and do it poorly, but this novel, I think, does it really, really well. It's cohesive in a way that I think is surprising.
Well, I hope the publisher, which is, Victoria University Press, is watching this, because I think you should get a commission on all the copies of it you've sold with your exemplary review.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'm very excited to have a fellow booktuber on as a guest for his debut appearance on Bite Size Book Chats, Peter of P English Literature. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be on your show.
And I should also say that Peter's joining us from Nigeria, and Peter has a really interesting channel. Peter, I think exclusively, maybe that's changed recently and I don't know, but I believe that Peter exclusively interviews writers who have published with independent presses. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true.
Tell us what you do over on your channel.
Yeah, it's P English Literature. It's a channel that I dedicated to the review of books that are independently published, because I'm a self-published author of 6 poetry book, and I thought about it that there are not much mean of promoting authors' work. There's not much mean with which I can get myself out there, and that's why I come up with the concept of creating a channel, P English Literature, to kind of give voice to independent published author and books that you would never have known or get to see. And again, I feel that there are a lot of self-published books that are actually reading self-published books, because we have different perception that people think it to be. some of which can be like, oh, it's not well refined in terms of it not going through a big publication house, stuff like that. And, I just thought that there are a lot of self-published book, the language in silence that people are not aware of. And that's why I come up with the concept of reviewing books that are mostly self-published. Well, I actually review other, traditionally published book, actually. But most of the books I talk about on my channel, like 80% of them are self-published. And also, I love to conduct interviews with authors from around the world. So far, the China I've been able to. I'm actually excited about it. It's something I love doing. It's my passion, and I'm just happy to have P English literature out there.
Well, I'm very happy that P English literature is out there too, and I just checked your subscriber count, and you're growing by leaps and bounds, so deservedly so. And I think it's obvious that Peter here has to be a really well-rounded autodidact to be able to interview writers of such disparate topics, because it's a lot of the books are nonfiction and they're really esoteric or off the beaten track topics. And I just can't believe how well you interview people about stuff that I've never heard of in my life before.
That's quite amazing.
It was a book that was not self-published that brought Peter and I together to have this chat, and that is a book that was published in 2005. It is a memoir about the Lost Boys of Sudan. Here's my copy. They poured fire on us from the sky. Subtitle is The True Story of Three Lost Boys from Sudan, and the authors are Benson Deng, Alephonsion Deng, Benjamin Ajak.
Deng.
Right. Benjamin Ajak with Judy A. Bernstein. I have read it. This is the first time that I have had a bite-sized book chat about a book that I myself have read. But I read it almost 20 years ago when it first came out. I was in correspondence with email contact with these lovely people, especially Judy, the co-writer. I was trying to get them up to do a reading or a presentation in Vancouver. It didn't work out, but I was in touch with them and I got the signed copy.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. So it's a book that I really treasure, and I read it, loved it many years ago, and now Peter's going to refresh my memory and maybe even get me to reread it. Tell us about this book, Peter.
Yeah, when I first discovered the Poured Fire from the Sky, I was quite enthralled with it. When I first read the story of, I was, even as an African, I was clueless of what was going on in Sudan. I'd never heard about the war. I'd never heard about the story of the lost boys who trekked thousands of miles all the way from Sudan, from their tribe, Dinka tribe in Sudan, in the village of Joe, more specifically, to Ethiopia, and from Ethiopia to Kenya, and from Kenya to the able to arrive in America finally. I never knew such kind of thing is going on in the world. I never heard about the Sudan Civil War, even as a Nigerian. So when I read about the story of these three lost boys from Sudan, Alephonsion Deng, Benson Deng, and Benjamin Ajak, I nearly shed tears. Like I was on the verge of shedding tears. The book is so sad. It's absolutely emotional. It is pulling. It is inspiring. It is just so lovely. One of the things that struck me the most is the fact that these boys were young when the war happened. The Sudan Civil War is the longest war in the history of Africa, with over 22 years. It started in 1983, not until 2007. I'm not correct about. I'm not sure if it's 2005 or 2007 that it ended. But I knew that it stood for like 22 years. It's the longest war ever in the history of Africa war. And these boys were very young when the war came and they left their village. Some of them were in the age range of 7, some were 9, some were 10. Imagine you being exposed to such kind of chronic and typical situation at that early time, that early age. And one of the things that struck me the most, that intrigued me about the book, is the fact that when the war people came, the soldiers, they invade the village of Joe. And from the perception of the author, the book is actually written from the perception of three authors. Aleppo tells his own story, Benson tells his own story, Benjamin also tells his own story. Then the soldiers invade the war, killed quite a lot of people, burned down art, and do quite a lot of terrible things. And the inhabitants of the village have nothing else to do than for them to flee and escape, trying to escape from war and all of that. So that's what led to the book. That's how they started their journey. And they trekked all the way from Joe in Sudan to Utopia, from Utopia to, I can't imagine how someone can trek that long distance, thousands of miles. Some trek barefoot. Some, because of the war, there are lots of starvation. There are no water. There are no food to eat. Some of them had to resort to eating leaves in the forest, leaves that they are not even aware of. They don't know if this is going to harm their body. And most of them, from the things they've ate, unknowingly, they died. Some died of starvation. Some died of thirst. Some were killed by lions while we were trekking this long journey in the wilderness, moving from one part to another. Young boys, I cried when I read the book. It's very terrible. And one part that struck me the most is the fact that this thing happens to the children. They're children. And there are people that do not even know about the causes of this war. They never have an issue with ethnic differences. One of the saddest things that cause war in Africa country is oil, is ethnic differences, religion, tribalism, and all of that. And these are children that did not even have any of this feature. They never have hatred in their mind, but they are made to, have this, to experience it in a terrible manner. It's just so horrible when I read the story. Quite a lot of people died on the road. It's so sad.
There's a lot of sadness in it and a lot of courage and a lot of heroism. Correct me if I'm wrong, Peter. My memory of this is that there were thousands of them crossing large swaths of Africa. I think it was at least 1,000 miles with not very many adults along. Am I right in remembering it that way?
Yes, I actually, there are adults among them. Because I read of a chapter in the book called Falling Down. They're not actually mostly boys, but most of them are boys, young people, but we still have adults among them. I remember some part that, the authors wrote about the experience with adults. Even adults fall down. Once you fall down, you don't stand up. It means that you are dead. Like, people are trekking quite a lot of time and they're exhausted. There is no food. Some of them are texty to the point that they had to drink their own urine in order to survive.
And a certain large number of them did make it to Kenya, right? The refugee camp. And the three Sudanese men that whose book this is, they eventually made it to the United States in 2001 and set up their lives here. What did you make of that part of the end of the book?
Yes, this is the first one, The Port Finals from the Sky. Then I would recommend you to get this, Disturbed in their next. This is like the follow-up of what happened to them in The Port Finals from the Sky. So this is like the story of their eventual return to America. This one was told from the perception of Alephonsion Deng and Judy A. Bernstein. So from their transition here, after they were able to move all the way and survive the typical situation in Africa, they were able to get to America, and from there, they started, though once they get to America, they have their own challenges. When they were still at the refugee camp in Kenya, they have this perception of what America looks like. There is There is money in the pillow. Once you just get there, remove pillow and start bringing out money. Stuff like that. There is free education. There is water is free. So they have this long-haired perception of what they're going to expect in America. America is going to be fun. It's going to be amazing. You don't have to. There's a lot of money. Stuff like that. But when you get to America, they realize that it wasn't as they were told back then in the refugee camp. And hilariously, I heard they're making a movie on Disturbed in their next.
Oh, that's fabulous.
That'll be fine, right? That'll be fabulous, actually.
I'm going to put a link in the show notes to Peter's full review of They Poured Fire on Us from the Sky. But I just see that 4 hours ago, he posted an interview with Judy Bernstein on his channel, which I'm looking forward to watching. She co-wrote this memoir with the three guys. Peter, thank you for telling us about not only They Poured Fire on Us from the Sky, but the follow-up memoir, which I had never heard about. Thanks.
Yeah, it's my joy. It's my pleasure. And I'm so excited to be on your show.
Holly from Hawaii is back. Welcome back, Holly.
Hi, Sean. Nice to be here.
We're here to talk about a novel that's been around for a couple decades now that I have never gotten to. Holly recently read it and really liked it, if not loved it. It is called Brick Lane by Monica Ali, a Bangladeshi British writer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Tell us about this book.
So in the book, we meet Nazneen, and she is the main character that we follow throughout the story. She is a woman who was born in, actually, it almost sounds like it's a part of Pakistan, but she's Bangladeshi. And when she turns 18, she then is married to a man who is 20 years older than her, who lives in London. And of course, she has no choice in this matter because it's all arranged marriages in her culture. So all of a sudden, she finds herself at 18 years old in a completely different country, in a completely different language, in a completely different culture. But her husband wants her to be the traditional wife and stay at home. So while she's surrounded by this totally different culture, she is basically within a box. And she stays within that box for quite some time, despite her efforts to push on it. And it's interesting because in certain ways, her husband is actually very kind to her, very good to her. But it's a little harder for the Western reader to see that because all of the things she wants to do and asks to do, he puts down and doesn't allow. But he's also grateful to her for what she does in the home, which I think is not exactly how those arranged type marriages are usually depicted. He never raises a hand to her. He doesn't really use harsh words with her. And we see that a lot depicted in literature in arranged marriages where they're abusive. And that's not happening at all in their marriage. So in certain ways, he's very good to her, but he wants her to stay within that box of their traditional culture. And she is pushing against it. And especially when her children are born, then she sees them becoming much more British because of course they are. And she really wants more and more and more to learn about the culture around her, to have some more freedoms, to be able to be part of both the Bangladeshi and the English culture.
Ooh, it sounds really good.
It is. It's a really interesting book. It's a slow book to get going. And I think that's important because we have to really be centered in Nazneen's life inside this apartment in order to truly understand what the world is for her and to her, because it's her life is very monotonous. And, you know, she has people who visit her who are part of their own culture, but that's it. She's really not going outside their apartment. And initially he's even doing the shopping. So she really is trapped. And you get that sense of her being trapped and you really feel it. And it's really well depicted. And so that slow start is necessary, but it's really worth hanging on and keep going with the book, even if it feels a bit slow, because it's worth it in the end, because it really paints a picture of this culture and how it is for women.
Well, I heard in that last comment a very diplomatic, thinly veiled admonition to Sean, the book maniac: don't bail, keep going.
you are a champion bailer, which on one hand I really appreciate because I am not nearly as good at it as you are. There's in fact a book I'm reading now that I really wanted to bail on and I just haven't. And I should channel you in those moments. But for this one in particular, the payoff is worth it. So even though it feels slow and maybe a little monotonous, that's purposeful. That's Ali telling us this is this woman's life. This is what it's like. But things do change a little as things go forward. So it's worth hanging on to.
Will you come back?
Absolutely. This is fun.
How delightful to have Freddie from Malaysia back here. Hello, Freddie.
Hello.
Freddie's got a great booktube channel called Sluggish Reader. I just momentarily blanked on it. That's ridiculous, but you must go check him out. And one of the books that he has recently read and raved about there is an Irish novel that had been on my radar, but kind of fell off my radar until I saw Freddie's Instagram post. And that is the novel Eggshells by Caitriona Lally from 2014. Please tell us about this book.
This book is an interesting one because when I first heard about it, it was apparently based on the description, it was going to involve some kind of magic. So it's about this woman who lives in Dublin. Her name is Vivian. And the major thing that she deals with in this book is that she believes that she is a changeling. And so most of this book is pretty much about her going around the city, figuring out a way to find some kind of portal or a door back to the world where she thinks she belongs. Like she doesn't think that she belongs in this current world. A lot of the things that happen in this book kind of shows us how peculiar, or at least, what we usually think of as peculiar, Vivian is as a character. And at the beginning of this book, one thing that she does is that she puts up an ad requesting for a friend, which is definitely something that sounds kind of eccentric to, I would say, most of us as well. Yeah, she's specifically looking for a friend named Penelope, and it sort of becomes something that would later be developed in the story as well, and how it connects with her kind of like effort to discover so-called her way back to her original world. But we would later learn why she does all of these things. And I think this is where it got like really interesting, because on the outside, the book seems like very quirky and weird. We have this character who acts in this like really strange way, but there is something that feels very human about the way that she acts once we know about what goes on behind everything that she does in the book.
So I have a question. She's looking for a friend called Penelope. Does that mean that she had a friend called Penelope that she lost track of, that she lost touch with, or she just wants a new friend and her name must be Penelope?
It's the latter.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. There's this kind of like, I think it's part of the strangeness that this book is trying to highlight, like how she insists that her name has to be Penelope. This character also has a certain interest in palindromes as well, even though Penelope isn't exactly a palindrome, but there is this kind of like the way that it sounds kind of appeals to her. It's definitely something that could catch your attention to see a character behaving like this.
And the tone is serious. Is there some moments of lightness or comedy in this?
Mostly comedy.
Mostly comedy.
Yeah, mostly comedy. It's a lot of funny moments if you can bear some of the more repetitious elements in this book. But it is mostly funny, some comedy of errors going on. There will be some moments of revelation where things can feel dark sometimes, especially at the end once we know more about the characters. But it's mostly funny. But I think that's another interesting part. It's like it is showing you a lot of these funny things about this character, but it is the implication of what goes on behind this funny facade that makes it really interesting to me.
Well, you have reminded me that Eggshells is on my radar. The Irish Readathon's coming up next March, so who knows? Freddie, thanks for telling us about the book.
Thank you for having me.